Hi folks, this is Trisha. We are re-releasing one of our earlier episodes from the year. Jeff asked me to think long and hard about what maybe one of my favorite episodes has been in 2022, which, wow, Jeff, tough question. So I spent a lot of time with this and I landed on our conversation with Swapna Krishna. This was the episode entitled Being a Science Communicator. So Swapna Krishna is a journalist, writer, communicator, and editor specializing in what she refers to as the geek space. She recently released a brand new PBS series on YouTube entitled Far Out. That's a show that focuses on science and technology. But our conversation talked a lot about creativity and actually what it means to really find yourself in the job that you hope to have, and how actually that takes a lot of experimentation. It takes a lot of tinkering, and it takes a little bit of course, hustle. So Swapna talks about, again, how that show Far Out came to be, as well as how she landed a gig writing on video games for Wired magazine. She really had me thinking a lot about how if we are passionate about something, we want to think about the unique perspective that our voice might have to offer to that space. And it had me thinking about students I've taught who've had an interest in video games and how I wish I could go back in time and ask them, hey, you know what, let's explore a magazine, an online resource like Wired. Let's see how video games are being discussed right now. And let's think about how your voice might offer a really unique perspective on it. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. Again, I think it's a great conversation to share with high school students too, who are thinking about what they might want to do. And they are thinking again about what it means to be a communicator today. Swapna reminds us that she had a steep learning curve in terms of learning how to write for video and how that's very different from just writing for the page. So if you teach writing, how might you have some activities where you're asking students to write for that medium specifically? Which reminds me, if you've not explored our free guide that is all about using fiction podcasts as prompts for creative writing, the link to that is over there in the show notes. I think it's a great guide maybe to explore at this time of year, or it's a great menu to offer to students, parents, and caretakers over the break. If they want to keep working on creative writing, I think fiction podcasts are a great tool to pursue. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you've listened to it before, I have to admit, I've actually listened to it about 5 times, and I continue to take something new away from what Swapna Krishna has to say about creativity, being a communicator, and so much more. Enjoy.
Welcome back to another Shifting Our Schools. I'm so excited to have our special guest, Swapna, here with us today. The STEM extraordinaire. She's all over every place. I'm so pumped. And thanks for engaging with us on Twitter too. That was kind of fun. It's just like one of those things where you're like, there's no way somebody like that's going to come on our podcast. So we're very excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
Thanks
for
good.
asking. Yeah.
This is great. And it just has so much to do with, our audience being educators and students. I just love what you're producing and want you to be able to tell your story and talk about how the things that you're doing, how do you see them being used in classrooms with educators and kids? So that's our hope for today. But let's get started with your journey, and maybe introduce yourself, talk about how did you get into all of these STEM roles, from journalism to YouTube channels to everything else that you do. So give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so my name is Swapna Krishna, and I'm the host of PBS's Far Out, but that's pretty new, but I've been doing STEM communication for a very long time. And, the way I got into it is really funny because I don't have a formal background in either, communication or STEM. I have a political science background, and that's what I majored in college. I have a master's degree in international relations, but I've always been interested in STEM and science. I think my story is a bit familiar to a lot of people. I was super into Star Trek as a kid. Still am, by the way, super into it. So I don't want to put that in the past tense. And so that really just sparked my interest in space and science, tech, and engineering. And so, but I kind of never really thought I could do it as a career. I've always wanted to be a writer, like not necessarily writing books, though that I think that's very cool, but just writing has always been a passion of mine. And it never quite, growing up, I don't think there was as much emphasis on science communication as there is today. I didn't realize that that was a thing I could do. But then everything, I was going into publishing and going that track. And then everything kind of changed. I guess it was like 2011, I think. I went to a NASA social, this is a great program from NASA. For anyone who's unaware, they basically invite social media people. And when I say social media people, I don't mean you have to have 50,000 followers. I mean, they'll invite somebody who has 120 followers, as long as you are enthusiastic and your audience is enthusiastic, to like special events to celebrate things. So I got invited to the second to last space shuttle launch to come in person, see it behind the scenes. Yes, it was an incredible experience, and it was the first time I had ever done science communication, because I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I feel a responsibility to share this with my followers and spread the word. And the response was just incredible. And I was like, oh, maybe I have a knack for this. But it wasn't really until a couple of years later, I went to another NASA social launch, this time the launch of Orion EFT-1. And I think it was like 2014 or 2015. And that was where I was like, okay, no, this is what I want to do. Like, I'm going to do a complete like left turn in my career, and I want to pursue, basically STEM communication. So I decided that was going to be my path. And then I'm a freelancer. So hustle is the name of the game for me. So I got a job at Engadget writing news to get some credibility and, and then ended up covering some rocket launches for them. And then since then, I've kind of been just doing this whole STEM thing, and it's been amazing.
I mean, when you say hustle is the name of the game, though, listeners, if you're not familiar with Swapna's work, we're talking about you being published in Slate, Los Angeles Times, Boston Globe, Fast Company, The Verge, and you also cover video games for NPR and for Wired. I know, yes. I'm thinking a few folks might be interested in that because, as somebody who works primarily with teens, covering video games for Wired and for NPR sounds like a dream gig. But again, I'm sure that didn't just sort of fall into your lap. Could you talk a little bit more specifically about how you found yourself with that job, and correct me if it is not, in fact, a dream job?
No, it is. Covering video games for Wired. For anyone who isn't familiar with for the way journalism works, Wired is like the pinnacle of tech. Being published in Wired is like every tech reporter's dream. So the fact that I have a column there and I get to write every 2 weeks about the stuff I'm playing, it is absolutely a dream. So that's a really good question. And basically, everything I have done in terms of writing, I try to come to it from a unique angle. And to kind of, I think, paying attention to a lot of what's going on in media, paying attention to a lot of what's going on specifically in video games, and reading a lot of the coverage. Basically, I saw that there was a big hole, and it's getting better now, but there is still a big hole in covering the perspective of kind of casual gamers. That's the name of my column at Wired, Casual Gamer. Basically a person who, yes, I have a console. I play PlayStation 5. I love it. I have a Switch. I play on my phone. But I am a gamer, and I am absolutely valid. That identity is absolutely valid. But a lot of gaming culture would try and gatekeep somebody like me out of it because, I don't play first-person shooters. I don't play online, really. when I game, I want to be by myself. I don't want to socialize with people.
Sure, right.
But like a lot of people would say, like a lot of people would declare me as not a real gamer. So, but there's so many of us, and especially I'm a parent. I have a toddler. It is really hard to find time to game, so I want certain things from my games. I want easy mode. I don't want to go up against the same boss 50 times and die, and that's the hour and a half I get to play for the day. Like, that's not what I want. And so I saw that there was this little niche, and I was like, okay, maybe someone wants to talk, someone else sees that too, and maybe my voice is important here. And so I cold pitched. I'd never had any like contact with Wired, and I cold pitched the culture editor, and then he was like, yeah, this sounds great. So I think being familiar with what is out there and having your pulse on the culture of whatever you want to talk about, and everything has a culture, whether it's like pop culture like video games, or there's definitely like for me space and space tech and space science is but there's definitely a culture around that. So seeing what people are engaging in, seeing what people are saying on the internet, but maybe isn't getting published in the mainstream outlets, that's been a very, very good strategy for me in terms of getting myself published.
Wow, that's very cool. And I mean, just amazing how you've been able to find your niche and make a career out of it. You've just launched, your most recent launch is Far Out. You can find it on YouTube, and we'll make sure there's links to everything in the show notes as well. But this is just an amazing free resource that, again, is just getting launched, just really starting to take off, and is going to be an incredible asset for educators. Can you tell us maybe a little bit behind the scenes of like, what are some of the skills and decisions that you have to make to decide like, what's the question we're going to pose? Yeah. What's the resources we're going to, how, and like even in the one that I just got done watching, which was on age, you were able to reach out to scientists and get other perspectives. And can you kind of maybe just tell us a little bit like where are you going with Far Out? What's the idea? And then what's some of the behind the scenes of like, how do you produce something like that?
Yeah, so basically Far Out is the next, few decades in science and technology. That is the ethos of the show. That's what we're trying to talk about. But there's so much to talk about in that space. So I think the first thing we try to do is narrow the topics as much as possible. So even though it's the future of, the kind of topic is the future of aging, we really do narrow it down as the episode progresses into, the future of longevity, the future of the health span. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to keep the topics narrow so we can talk about them in a deep way we want people to feel like they've learned something and not that they've gotten like a broad overview of a topic. Like that's important to me as somebody who really likes digging in the details, and who I want someone to leave the show with the like, did you know fact that they can share at a party, that sort of thing. So it's a definitely a process that we're still refining because we've filmed 3 episodes now. But basically, I work with my researchers. I have two, we talk about the topics together. So we have kind of broad strokes of the ideas we want to do, but it's in terms of narrowing them down. And we try to be topical in terms of like, okay, the summer is coming. What's on people's minds in the summer? Keeping the season, keeping an eye on what's in the headlines. We do, it's a YouTube show, so we can move pretty fast, but we still need a couple of months lead time. So like keeping an eye on what people are talking about and that sort of thing. But it is basically just a process of what makes all of us go like, oh, that's interesting. I would like to know more, because it's a generalist show. None of us are going to be experts in what we're talking about, unless, if we do a space show, sure, I can ad lib about that for an hour. But for the most part, not both my researchers are science writers, but like nobody's really usually going to have a huge expertise in what we're talking about. So it's a matter of what makes us want to know more.
Do you have like just a real passion for learning?
I do.
Do you just love to learn?
I love knowing more, and I think that the secret about it is like the more you learn, the more you realize how much you don't know.
I love that. And all I kept thinking about when you were talking was just like every ELA teacher that's listening to this has to be like, thesis statements matter. When you're in high school and your ELA teacher's like, you got to narrow it down. You got to narrow it down. And that's really what you're talking about, right? Like you have these broad ideas, but you've got to be able to narrow it down to where it's like, this is what we're going to cover. This is the essential question. And now we're going to give you some information to help you learn it.
Absolutely. I'll tell you a secret. Every single article I write the thesis statement first. Like my high school composition teacher would be very, very proud. Every single thing I write, the first thing I do is write the thesis statement. And it changes as we research, for sure. Like all three of these first 3 episodes we've done have changed as we've gotten research and we've talked to, experts. But, keeping that in mind, like what's the core thing we're trying to convey is so important.
I love that.
I was just going to ask because, again, a lot of our audience, educators, they have students who they would love to pursue taking their YouTube channel to the next level. And of course, an episode like the one that we're talking about, it's not as though you crank that out overnight and it's published. Can you give folks just, kind of an estimate, a rough idea of start to finish, including that research and that kind of ideation process that you were talking about, start to finish? What does that time investment look like?
Absolutely. So for a show like Far Out, I will give you an example. Now, the pilot we're going to move faster than this generally, but the pilot, we spent a week researching, probably 1 to 2 weeks writing the pilot. We filmed in March and then it just went live and we were making tweaks to it until the end. Like there was probably the last week or 2 that we stopped, but it's not going to be this long because we were still trying to get the feel of the show right and the look of the show right. Because there's a lot of elements that go into that. But I would say we are at, every step of it takes a week at least. Post-production probably takes 2. I'm not as involved in that. Although I do, I do know I'm not very great at editing video, but I do stuff on TikTok and stuff like that. So I understand, some of what goes into it and it's very complicated, but for the writing and the scripting, it's 2 to 3 weeks, just because the research, the writing and the scripting, because, and it's not just I write the script and then I go and say it. We have table reads where everybody on our team, production, and the production people, everybody can ask questions because I would much rather somebody say, I don't understand that at a production meeting than I don't understand that in a YouTube comment. You know what I mean? Right, I want to make sure we are being very clear and very precise too, because we do not underestimate the intelligence of our audience. These are very smart people and we want to respect that and not, gloss over some fact or, something like that, and then have people think we are not accurate when, we are technically being, there's language in precision in language is very important in something like this. So we have that table read, and then I go one-on-one with my director, and we go through and finesse the language, make things sound as natural as they can to me, even though, I'm writing the script, but still, I'm still learning to be a video writer. I've been a print writer for, most of my career. So I'm really, really learning on what it is to write for video and even write for myself for video. And so, learning how to make it sound natural and like me and the rhythm of speaking and those sorts of things. And those are things I'm still learning.
Yeah. I love that. That's it's a new genre of writing, right? Video writing or script writing.
It is.
For a YouTube video. Is your goal, the last one that I watched was about 8 minutes or so. Is your goal to kind of keep them under 10, fast paced?
Yeah, 8 to 10.
Keep them going. Is that 8 to 10 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome.
Yes.
As someone who you are doing all this stuff, you're learning all the time. Who are some of the influencers or influential people that you follow, that you love to learn from, that are in your own network? In Wired and Engadget and every place else. I'm sure you have lots, but who are some of the people that really influence you?
Yeah, so there's a ton of great people out there, but in terms of, science communication and especially, work on video and work on social media, there's a few. Emily Calandrelli, who's also a good friend of mine. She is the space gal across, platforms, and she's also Emily's Wonder Lab from Netflix. That's her show, and the host of Exploration Outer Space. So she's everywhere. She's amazing. But She has been an inspiration of mine for a long time because she just does what she does so well. She's so authentic and really reaches people and tries to meet people where they're at. And I really respect her. Sophia Gad-Nasser, she's a PhD student in cosmology, I believe. She's Astro Party Girl across,
Wow.
across Twitter, I think Twitter, Instagram, and on TikTok as well, I think. And she is doing such good work, explaining the intricacies of science, because while I am a science communicator, I am not a scientist, and I know a lot at this point because I've reported on a lot and I've talked to a lot of experts, but I always like to, go back to the experts to make sure that I'm accurate. And so, Sophia she's a science communicator, but she's also a, scientist. And so I think she is amazing. Science Sam is also, Samantha Yamin is also amazing. She's mostly on Instagram, but she was kind of, she was criticized by some entrenched scientists who didn't like her approach. She's also a scientist. Didn't like her approach of trying to communicate through social media, and has been attacked for that. And I think she was one of the first to really bring attention to the fact that we can really communicate incredibly effectively through platforms like YouTube, platforms like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. These are very effective, and we should reach out on these platforms. I feel really strongly about speaking in plain language, not being condescending, and being where people are and where people want to learn. I don't expect people to come to my website to find my stuff. I need to meet them where they're at.
I love that. That's so powerful. You said a couple times there that you're a science communicator. Is that your job title? Is that what you consider yourself?
Space science and technology journalist is usually what I say.
Okay.
Yeah, I usually say space science and technology journalist, but I'm moving much more towards the communicator stuff with the scripting and all that. There is a lot of journalism involved, but I honestly, I am in a place where I am moving kind of from the journalism sphere to the more larger communication. I post science videos, space related videos on TikTok and across social media, but mainly TikTok is the focus. And so that is kind of more of a communication role than a journalism role. So it's kind of, I'm just trying to talk to people about how cool all this stuff is, basically. And so however anybody wants to find me and wherever they want to find me, whether it's through the more traditional, places with more credibility like Wired or Engadget or, all of those, or whether it's, on TikTok, it's fine. I'm happy either way.
I like that. Very cool. So as we kind of pivot to talk about, and we can focus on all of your stuff, but we'll focus on Far Out for right now. For educators who want to connect their students with you, with the stuff that you're starting to produce on Far Out, and I know you've probably got more stuff coming, what does that look like, you think, from an educational standpoint, as far as teachers being able to get engage with you, with students, whether it's comments in YouTube videos? Do you have a social media person that's responding to comments or asking questions? Are you taking are you taking topics from kids and teachers? Where do you see this fitting from an educational standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in terms of me, I am very accessible. If you tweet me on Twitter, I will see it and I will usually respond. I try to at least acknowledge everything I get. I'm not always able to respond to everything, but I generally make myself, especially on Twitter, generally on social media platforms, sometimes depending, TikTok, I know where that's where a lot of younger people are, but the commenting system is kind of a mess over there. So I don't see as much of that. But something like Twitter, I am very accessible and I try to be. In terms of the YouTube comments, I do look at all of them. I don't really respond to a ton of them. But we do have people looking at them. And if there is ever an episode topic anyone would like to see, please leave it in the YouTube comments, because we do look at that and we are very responsive to our audience. We want to know what our audience we want to know what our audience wants to see. And so if there's something somebody feels strongly about, or a teacher or a classroom is like, oh, I would love to see a video on X, like, let us know and we will absolutely do it. But yes, I am generally very accessible, and I try to make myself accessible. People can email me. My email address is, it's on my website, but I feel like Twitter is usually the way people choose to reach out, and I am happy with that and fine with that. And I love it. Like, I love engaging with people. I love talking to people about this stuff. And people have been so incredibly kind about, the launch and debut of this series. And I'm just really grateful that it's resonating, honestly.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome. So, part of where we are right now in education is we are really focused on STEM, right? The science, technology, engineering, and math. And we're trying to figure out, like, how do we support, like, the next generation of STEM students? I mean, that's a massive focus right now in education. And some of the things I love that you're talking about, like, there's so much writing involved, right? And the creativity aspect, like, things when we think about math or we think about engineering, we don't always think about, oh yeah, you've got to be able to write and you've got to be able to, stand up and deliver on YouTube or deliver in front of a camera, right? A talk or a script in that way. What advice would you give to educators who want to support students with a passion in STEM? Like, this passion for learning that you have, how do you get others to do that?
I think there's a few ways. I feel like these days everybody kind of wants to be an influencer, and I'm moving more towards that. I'm not really an influencer in the traditional sense, but as I'm doing more social media science communication, I'm seeing more of, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of unpaid work. So that is not, unless people are really, really very into it, I don't necessarily recommend, like, going all in on influencer right from the start. There's a lot of other things you could do. I do feel like supporting things like people who want to write about, science and STEM topics. I think that's really important, because what I have found and how I kind of got started with a lot of, like, my professional work in this was recognizing that just because we all can write doesn't mean we all can communicate. Those are two different things. Yeah, so, like, we can all, most of us can write. We know the mechanics of writing, but effective communication is very difficult, and it's an art, and it's a skill that is learned through, hard work and recognizing, especially distilling down topics that are as complicated as STEM topics. These are really, really complicated topics. So how do you balance delivering the communication effectively and clearly without being condescending? Because that's the key thing here. I think effective communication is never condescending and never underestimates the intelligence of the audience, because so much communication I see does that, and it's condescending and it's talking down to people, and, like, that's not effective communication. Or it's shaming people for not knowing that's not effective communication. So I think compassion is so important. And so I think cultivating these skills is incredibly important, because we need the scientists, and we need, the mathematicians, and we need all these people, but we also need people to communicate these discoveries and these triumphs and this amazing stuff. And while plenty of STEM people are very effective communicators, plenty are not. And it's a skill that I think is undervalued. And I have found, like, in my personal experience, people do wonder, well, why didn't you just become an engineer if you were passionate about engineering, which is a lot of what I was passionate about when I was younger. And it's because I don't want to be an engineer. I wanted to talk about the stuff, not do the stuff.
I
don't want to, that's not where my passion lies. My passion lies in talking about it and getting really excited about it and, geeking out about this stuff. That's what I love doing. And I think encouraging that and making it clear there's a career path there, because I think that was what was key for me, and why it took me so long to find it, was that I didn't understand, especially growing up, Indian and immigrant household, like I didn't understand the career paths that were available to me that weren't like doctor, lawyer, computer programmer. Growing up, that was just not in my realm of understanding, and it took me a lot longer to kind of come into my career than I think a lot of people, because I just didn't understand what was out there. And so I think making it clear that you don't have to be a scientist to talk about science, I think that's important.
I love that because, Jeff, I know that you and I talk about this all the time in education, opening our minds up and being a little bit more expansive around not putting each subject in a silo and not saying, oh, this is over here, that's over there. You really see the skills as that throughway and that connection. And I think that's going to resonate with our audience. And I love that idea of, again, providing a lengthier menu of career pathways. I truly hope that this episode is going to reach a lot of students, because again, there's just so many different passions that have come through in the work that you do that blow my mind. Again, I'm just really thankful that you took the time to share that with us.
Of course. I'm so excited. I'm very excited to be here and to be able to talk about it, because I know, you do not know how many, you probably actually do know exactly how many times I get asked, like, how do I do what you do? And like, I want, and I'm in a place where I don't want, like, it's not that, I don't see it as competition. I want 1,000 people just like me who are just as enthusiastic as I am doing the exact same thing I'm doing, because there's room for all of us. And so like, there's a gatekeeping, there's also like to a lot of this, there's a gatekeeping mechanism where people think like, oh, there's only room for one, influencer talking about space. Like, no, that's not the case. And like, one thing that has been really nice is finding other people, but other women especially, who have, as I'm getting into this video thing, who I have been able to like DM and be like, hey, like, can you help me? Like, this is very new for me. I don't know what I'm doing. And they've been like, yes, here's this and this and this. And it's been so nice to, and I want to do that for other people.
I love that. You find your community and you lean on your community leans on you. And we're all better for it. We're all better for
Absolutely.
it. Swapna, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. We will make sure there are links to everything in the show notes. You can go watch the Far Out episodes on YouTube, connect with her on Twitter, get your students connected. I don't know a high school kid that doesn't have a Twitter account, so get them, put up on the whiteboard. Put her handle up on the whiteboard and have kids follow her, especially if you geek out with science and space and all of the good stuff, man. She's such a great person to follow. You're gonna love and learn so much of what she is sharing out there. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Shifting Our Schools. If you found this episode helpful or inspiring, please make sure to subscribe and leave the team a 5-star rating. If you want to learn more about the Shifting Schools team or download our free resources, head over to shiftingschools.com to see what's on offer now. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode to keep rethinking the shifts our schools need.